For Telesur, I'm Cody Weddle in Caracas. A 72-hour ceasefire between Israel and Palestinian forces has ended and fighting there has resumed. At least one child was killed as the Israeli army resumed attacks on several locations in Gaza. Israel began its so-called Operation Protective Edge a month ago today. It has killed almost 2,000 people so far, including 400 children. Palestinians are demanding a lifting of Israel's 7-year blockade on Gaza, while Israel wants Palestinian forces to disarm. Egyptian officials say discussions in Cairo towards a lasting truce have not yet been finalized. In Gaza, thousands demonstrated in opposition to the continuation of Israeli shellings, but they also celebrated what some have called a political and military victory by Hamas over Israel. Of the 66 Israeli dead since the start of the assault on Gaza, 64 were IDF soldiers. Demonstrators expressed support for the Palestinian leadership demands in Cairo, including an end to the blockade. The World Health Organization has declared the Ebola epidemic an international public health emergency. The UN body will implement exceptional measures to prevent the spread of the virus sweeping through West Africa. There are no bans on travel or trade as of yet. WHO Director Dr. Margaret Chan says that the hardest hit countries cannot manage without international support. More than 900 people have died during what is the worst Ebola outbreak in almost 40 years. Liberia has declared a state of emergency due to the spread of the disease, with security forces preventing people from leaving most of the affected areas.
For health security and the environment here at WHO.
Since it was first identified in 1976, fewer than 1,000 people have caught Ebola per year. The virus incubation period is generally around 21 days. Symptoms can include high fever, internal bleeding, as well as damage to the central nervous system. While tests for experimental drugs are currently underway, there is no proven vaccine or cure yet. Ebola is spread directly by contact with infected bodily fluids or indirectly through contact with contaminated environments. While the virus can sometimes come with a 90% fatality rate, this latest epidemic has seen a 50% death rate. Juan Manuel Santos was sworn in for a second term as president yesterday in Colombia. As Charles Parkinson reports, Santos plans to continue the Colombian peace process and negotiations with FARC guerrillas.
Colombia's President Juan Manuel Santos was sworn in for his second term on August the 7th, less than 2 months after a tight election in which his promise to deliver peace to the country was central to his victory. Addressing a crowd that included many of the region's presidents and the King of Spain, he quickly affirmed his commitment to the ongoing peace process with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia.
The time has arrived for Colombia. Colombia today needs a path of hope, a path towards peace.
It was the peace process that dominated Santos' speech as he rolled out his long-term vision of the country, which remains plagued by drug trafficking and paramilitary violence.
In a decade, a country in complete peace, a country with equality, and the most educated in Latin America.
The question now is whether Santos can deliver on his promises. It was a speech that drew great applause from those in attendance, but it will be the millions of Colombians across the country whose approval matters most over the next 4 years. This is Charles Parkinson for Telesur English in Bogotá, Colombia.
Argentina has filed a petition to The Hague accusing the U.S. of violating the South American country's sovereignty over the recent Vulture Funds ruling. Argentine President Cristina Fernandez announced the petition to the International Court of Justice. Argentina claims that a ruling by U.S. Judge Thomas Griesa interferes in Argentina's economic sovereignty. U.S. courts continue preventing Argentina from paying 93% of its creditors. The Fernandez government has placed full-page ads in U.S. papers hitting back at the ruling. The ads prompted Griesa to call a meeting with Argentine officials and Vulture Fund creditors scheduled for today. Ecuador will invest over $7.2 billion in public infrastructure this year. The administration of President Rafael Correa announced that the investments will concentrate on improving road and energy infrastructure, as well as building hospitals, housing, and education centers. Correa's Citizens Revolution has brought dynamic change to Ecuador and lifted more than 1.3 million people out of poverty. Costa Rica is looking to change the country's constitution to reflect its multicultural population and combat racism. The constitution currently makes no mention of Costa Rica's 4 major ethnic origins. Those include indigenous, African, European, and Asian. Historically, the ruling class comes from white European descent. Several countries, following the examples of Bolivia and Ecuador, have started to recognize the diverse ethnic and national roots of Latin America, particularly indigenous and African heritage. The United States has launched airstrikes on Iraq less than 3 years after the U.S. forces withdrew from the country. In a press conference today, U.S. President Barack Obama announced that he had authorized 2 separate operations: an airstrike on artillery positions of ISIL extremists in northern Iraq, as well as humanitarian drop for civilians who are now trapped on Mount Sinjar after fleeing ISIL threats. The attacks come as leftist Kurdish forces from Syria and Turkey entered Iraq to defend Kurdish civilians against ISIL. NATO Chief Anders Fogh Rasmussen issued warnings to Russia in a visit to Kiev yesterday. Rasmussen met with Kiev leaders, assuring them of NATO support in the form of advisors and assistance. NATO has accused Moscow of amassing troops on the border with Ukraine. The Ukrainian army abandoned its ceasefire, killing dozens of civilians in the country's east. Over 1,300 people have been killed in what the Red Cross has designated a civil war. Some Italians are actively alleging racism in the country's top soccer league. Politicians and fans are uniting to prevent a controversial figure from assuming the country's top position in the sport. Thousands have signed a petition calling for Carlo Tavecchio to step down as a candidate for president of the Italian Football Federation. On Thursday, center-left lawmaker Khalid Chauki said in a press conference that over 26,000 signatures had been collected demanding that Tavecchio withdraw. The 71-year-old caused outrage by referring to Juventus star Paul Pogba as someone, quote, who previously ate bananas, end quote. Tavecchio apologized but has so far refused to withdraw from the August 11th election. And that's what we're following. You can find more on those stories and more at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle.